Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Today, we have Zulika Gonzalez, Community Engagement Manager with CASA Pinellas. And if you don't know, CASA is the official provider of domestic violence support in Pinellas County. CASA serves individuals of all genders, ages, ethnicities, abilities, and socioeconomic statuses. And today, we're going to be talking about pets and domestic violence. And this training is intended to explain the way abusers will use pets as a means of power and control over their survivors. And with that, I'll let you take it away, Zuli.
Thank you so much, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see a lot of familiar faces. I am looking forward to sharing with you all about domestic violence and pets. And let me set this up real quick. I just want to make sure I got this. All right. And does everybody see the screen
Yes.
clearly? Awesome. Okay, thank you. Great. So yeah, my name is Zuli, and I am the community engagement coordinator for Casa Pinellas. And so my goal for you all is to really have an understanding of what domestic violence looks like, but especially how perpetrators utilize pets to continue to perpetrate their abuse over their victims. And so, for the purposes of this training, you might hear me referring to the survivor as she and the perpetrator as he. But we do recognize that domestic violence affects both men and women. So I just wanted to preface everybody with that. I also wanted to share, also too, there might be some, triggering content here. Domestic violence isn't really an easy topic to talk about. It can be really crunchy. But I think it's really important that we normalize talking about domestic violence and those symptoms that come with domestic violence so that we can be bridges and we can stand in the gap for those that are experiencing it and naming them, naming it to tame it. So I would like to cover the legal definition and the social definition to domestic violence. And I'll give you guys a Cliff Note version because I recognize some of your faces. But essentially, there's a legal definition and a social definition to domestic violence. And the reason that we have that is because a legal definition is enough, it names the act that makes it enough for offense to be arrestable. But the social definition talks about all of those other things that occur in domestic violence, those other dynamics of domestic violence that don't necessarily rise to a level that would warrant an arrest. Now, does it mean that domestic violence doesn't occur if there isn't physical violence happening? No, domestic violence includes a lot of, emotional, psychological, intimidations, humiliation, isolation, and lots of threats, lots of coercive control behavior. And sometimes those behaviors aren't arrestable, but they do indicate that there is domestic violence present. So when we know that there's domestic violence present, we know that there can also be animal cruelty. And so this is our statute that talks about animal cruelty. Oh, sorry, I just jumped ahead. So it says it's a person who unnecessarily overloads, overrides, torments, deprives of necessary sustenance, shelters, or unnecessarily mutates or kills an animal, or causes the same to be done, or carries in or upon a vehicle or otherwise any animal in a cruel or inhumane manner commits animal cruelty is a misdemeanor or first degree punishable by the statute listed below. So why is it important for us to know some of those things? Well, one of the things that we do understand is that our veterinarians are mandated reporters, and they're mandated reporters by law to report animal cruelty. I don't know if you guys had seen any, like there were videos that were going around social media where a woman showed up to her vet with her dog and she wrote a little letter and she gave it to the receptionist. And in the letter, she said that she was being held captive by her perpetrator, that he had a gun on him, and that they needed to call 911, that she was in fear for her life, and telling her perpetrator that she needed to take her dog to the vet was the only way that he would let her leave the house. So, so that's why it's really important that we work with that part of our community so that they can see what those symptoms look like. Because we do know that 1 in 3 women report that they've experienced some form of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. But we also know that 1 in 4 men have also experienced that in their lifetime. And then what's jarring is that we know that 1 in 10 high school students have reported experiencing the same, but that's just in the past year alone, just in the past year. Our statistics around pets and domestic violence, we know that 89% of domestic violence survivors have reported that their pets have been threatened, harmed, or have been killed by their partner. In a national survey, about 94% of DV shelters indicate that women coming to the facilities spoke a lot about pet abuse that occurred in the home. And according to surveys, women in domestic violence shelters were 11 times more likely to report animal abuse by their partners than there was a comparison of women that were not experiencing abuse. And why is that? A lot of it has to do, domestic violence is about power and control. And so if there is a dynamic in this scheme of power and control that I can utilize to hurt that person that I'm trying to assert that power and control, they use it. And what we know is really violent perpetrators, they will go after the pets. And if they go after the pets, they go after the children. If they go after the children, they go after the pets. And so those are things that we constantly look at because it really lets us know what is the lethality that we're looking at when we are assessing for safety for our survivor, but also how lethal this perpetrator can be as well. We know that 48% of survivors with pets, they delay leaving dangerous environments for fear of leaving their pets behind, which is very true. CASA is one of 7 shelters in the state of Florida that allow survivors to leave and bring their pets with them. 100% of sexual homicide offenders examined had a history of cruelty towards animals. 63% of men who had committed crimes of aggression admitted that they had committed the same to an animal first. Animal abusers commit at least one other criminal offense, and almost 40% have committed violent crimes against people. So that's, it's a big blaring red flag when we're talking about abusers who will perpetrate abuse against pets, and when we're looking at the survivors and the families that are in their home. And 88% of families under supervision for physical abuse of their children. So these are families that have open cases with dependency cases. So perhaps they have a CPI case that occurred, and now they're in case management, and they have an open case plan that they're working. Have found that pet abuse actually was one of the indicators that led up to the child abuse. So DV survivors whose abusers abused their pets reported more than twice as many incidences of child abuse than DV survivors whose abusers did not abuse their pet. Abusers demonstrate power and control over the family by threatening, harming, or killing the animal. And again, because it's really about power and control. It's a feeling of superiority. And the only way to do that is to constantly make that victim feel inferior until they really believe it and essentially have entered into somewhat of a Stockholm. And they believe it, and they're just abiding by the rules to make sure that they navigate what safety they have in their home. And that feels like what? It feels like walking on eggshells, right? It feels like walking on eggshells. So some of the tactics of power and control are intimidation, And these are like spokes from the wheel, right? So power and control is the wheel, and the tactics are the spokes, right? They're the spokes that really speak to what power and control looks like. Um, so there's intimidation, there's isolation, there's emotional abuse, there's minimizing, denying, and blaming. That's, I didn't really do that. You know what you were doing to make me have to react like that, you know. So it's really your fault. Using children, economic abuse. And then there's gender privilege, you know, asserting gender roles. And then there's coercion and threat. And so um, domestic violence is really not an anger problem or a substance abuse problem. It's really truly down to power and control. And I would say, like, it's almost like an addiction, right? People, abusers are addicted to power and control. And so where violence becomes present is when they're not able to assert that power and control over their victims. The average survivor will try to leave their abusive relationship up to 7 times before they leave for good. And that's why I always share that survivors, you know, one of the things that if we could take out of our maybe our verbiage when we talk to people who are experiencing violence is why don't you just leave? Because it doesn't, they can't just leave. Survivors, they don't leave. They actually escape, and escape takes planning. It takes planning because leaving an abuser is really the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence. The loss of power and control for that abuser. Remember, I talked about that abuser, he is an addict, and his drug of choice is power and control. So when he has that loss of power and control, what it does is it triggers a lethal action. So then he demonstrates and he maintains his power and control through some tactics. And if he's used some type of violence, right? So let's say that in the past, maybe perhaps he like would push into her or would shove her. The next time she tries to leave, the next time it would be a shove. The next time it would be a slap. The next time it would be being hit with an open hand, or it would be, you know, being hit with a closed fist, and it just escalates. And so wherever that survivor is on that pendulum of violence, right? Leaving could really swing it really, really far. And so what we know is that 20% of homicide victims were not the domestic violence victims, but they were family members and friends and neighbors and people who tried to intervene, and law enforcement responders or bystanders. The number one cop killer is a person who has a history with domestic violence. The data proves it. Um, the data also supports that a lot of our mass shooters had some history of domestic violence or were children that were raised in a home with domestic violence. And on top of that, they also did some type of animal cruelty where, you know, they hurt their animals or animals in their neighborhood. There are lots of barriers that come to leaving, and outside of the obvious things of fear and their children and finances, and you know, there are also cultural aspects that need to be considered when it comes to leaving, and you know, documentation, making sure that they're having their documentation. We also have their struggles for those that, you know, are undocumented, seniors and individuals in rural areas. But also, I always like to name too that, you know, the barrier also there is love and hope. Um, when you have a relationship, you know, there isn't very few is it, you know, a clean break unless it was like really bad. And even sometimes in those really bad situations, it's not really a clean break. So the expectation for us, I think, as a society to expect that on domestic violence survivors is really unfair. It's unfair to them. And they do hold on to love and hope, you know, especially if it wasn't something that was present in the relationship. I'm going to get some water. Now, there are some lethality indicators that are really important for us to look at. And cruelty to animal is a huge red blaring flag, which is sirens and pointing fingers going like this for lethality. It tells us that if they can be harmful to the pet, they certainly can do that to the children and to the survivor. And some of the things that we look at with the with lethality indicators is the physical violence, has it increased in severity and frequency? Um, does the perpetrator have access to weapons, especially guns? Have they tried to strangle, choke you at any time? And sometimes, we'd sit down and have to talk about what that looks like. Do they come behind you and put your arm up against you? Do they hold you up against the wall and hold you up with their arm, call it an arm bar, Has there ever been sexual abuse? Are they violently, constantly jealous? And when I talk about violently, constantly jealous, is you look so beautiful and there's somebody looking at you, and I'm going to have to beat that person up or do something to that person because they're looking at you. But they love the fact that you know, look good. They like the trophy. Stalking, use of substance abuse, threats to children, when they avoid being arrested, when they control daily activity, and if the survivor believes that the perpetrator is capable of murdering them. When we sit down and we talk about this with our survivors that are wanting to leave, we do this assessment of lethality because it really helps us create a tailored safety plan for that survivor so that they can survive any types of these incidences that could possibly happen. And I don't know if I shared this before, but one of the things that I'm the most proudest about when I talk about my titles with CASA is that I'm a CASA survivor. And I'm a survivor because I had an advocate when I met with her. She went and she did this lethality assessment with me. And she said to me, he's not hitting you right now, but he's going to hit you. And when he does, it's going to be really violent and it's going to be really quick. And so she gave me this safety plan she told me if he was on top of me and I didn't feel like I could fight him off of me, she told me to puke on myself. She told me to try and pee on myself. She told me to defecate on myself to try to get him off of me. She told me to fake a seizure. And I just was like, wow, this is really intense. But I'll tell you, about 90% of the things that she told me to do really resulted in me being here today and alive today. I'm working for CASA. Uh, what we know with strangulation is the most lethal form of domestic violence. It's considered the final warning shot, and that's because unconsciousness can occur within seconds, and so is the cutoff of blood supply to your brain. So within seconds, you can lose oxygen, and then you can also lose the blood supply to your brain, and then there are often no external signs of strangulation. And so what we know is there is strangulation tactics, symptoms in this dynamic. We know that victim is 750% more likely to be continued to be strangled and to be killed. Strangulation also, what we know is that those individuals who have murdered officers, 3 out of 4 individuals who have murdered officers on the line of duty had some history of strangulation, some documented history of strangulation. And when we talk about documented history of strangulation, animal cruelty, there are documentation of perpetrators that strangled pets and killed them through strangulation. There have been cases that I worked that the perpetrator had a history and he abused children and he strangled them and then eventually strangled mom, or mom first and then the children. So it's important when you're leaving with pets that they get all of their vaccination paperwork and registration paperwork that they take with them, including any kind of microchip that they might have to show the proof of ownership and to be able to prepare quickly. But honestly, if they're not able to do all those things, you know, they want to be able to see if they can plan to have their pet stay with a family friend or get in contact with a center that has the ability to be able to take pets in. There are a lot of centers and a lot of organizations that will foster pets for domestic violence survivors, or they'll help pay for kennels for survivors if they have to be at a shelter for some time. And they can always ask animal control or law enforcement to retrieve the pet. They don't have to go alone to get their pet. After they're leaving, they want to make sure that they keep their pets inside. They want to pick a safe routine when it comes to their pets. They don't want to exercise and walk alone with their pet, and they want to be able to change their veterinarian as quickly as possible. So, how do you help someone who's experiencing domestic violence? Well, what we say really does matter. We can speak with empathy, we can speak with compassion, we can speak with grace, and most importantly, I think it's just if we create space for conversation. Sometimes people, um, when they feel like it's safe enough to talk, they just need to talk. So, allowing for those awkward moments of silence so people can just talk. Think about some of the words that we use and delete maybe some phrases like, you should just leave. Um, it must not be that bad if you're saying, remember, it takes 7 times for them to leave, or what did you do? Or, oh, I would never let anyone treat me like that. It makes the survivor feel incredibly small in those moments when they perhaps have reached out and said something to someone and just wanted to, have a, just a listening ear. Um, again, have empathy, believe them. I'll tell you, one time I had a survivor and I met her the day after her attack. And one of the things I said to her was, I know that this wasn't the first time she was held down and beaten for about 6 hours. He shot at her over 17 times. And I said to her, did you ever reach out to anybody and share? And she said, I did, but nobody believed me. And so believe them, because sometimes they'll say things and they'll test to see, like, if you're really listening. And sometimes people will be like, oh my God, that's so ridiculous. No way, shut up. And so then they just close up. And then be a conduit of resources. If they need information, offer to look up resources and get information for them on what it might look like to leave. What are the things that you're noticing that are lethality indicators? And it's important to know that many survivors may be more inclined to talk about the abuse happening to their pet than the form of abuse that might be happening to their family. Um, because sometimes these abusers might normalize it. And if they are, certainly it's happening at home. So CASA services and helping CASA continues to be our life-saving mission. And a part of that is what we do here is our prevention work. We have our Peacemaker program that goes into the schools and adult education. My role, where I provide training to organizations internally and externally to the demographics that they serve. We have an emergency services where we have a 24-hour hotline where somebody can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And you can talk to an advocate there. If you're experiencing domestic violence or if somebody you know is experiencing domestic violence, and they can give you some tips and pointers on how to work with someone. Um, we have our shelter where we provide wraparound services. And on our shelter, we have an on-site and we have an off-site kennel. We also work with an organization called Protecting Paws. And Protecting Paws is statewide, where they provide free or low-cost veterinary care for survivors. And they do assessments on the pets when they come to see what kind of trauma they've experienced. And they also help provide um, access to other organizations that have where they foster pets for survivors. I also want to share that 70% of the survivors that come to CASA for services actually don't need shelter. They just come to our Family Justice Center for services. So if a survivor wants to relocate, CASA has funding to pay for a plane ticket and carriers for pet. We have funding with partnerships and local vets to assist with vaccination, boarding, grooming, and medical concerns. So sometimes survivors may not have all the documentation needed for them to be at the shelter. So what we do is we work with our partner and a kennel. The dog is kenneled with a vet. They quarantine them, give them all their vaccinations, and get them ready to be able to join their human at our shelter. And FJC also our Family Justice Center, which is our admin office, also allows walk-ins with pets. We have a 6-team injunction for protection attorney program where they work with survivors that are seeking injunctions. And they also are able to seek injunctions where their pets are covered in their injunction. And this is at no cost to the survivor. There is no income qualifications needed to qualify for the injunction for protection. Um, and so we can actually put this in our injunction orders. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why we did that. CASA was able to push up some stories of survivors that lost their pets um, in their abuse. And one of them was when a survivor actually worked with us to try to get an injunction. And we just thought, let's just throw in the pet to see if the judge will, grant it. And the judge was like, well, if you could get it written on here, we could, but we have no jurisdiction to. And so we decided that's what we want to do. We want to see how we can get it written onto injunction paperwork. And unfortunately, that perpetrator, when she was trying to leave with her pet in her hand, ended up stabbing her pet to death in her hands, ended up stabbing her a couple of times as well. We have restorative care, which is our shelter and our transitional housing. And we have our non residential advocates. We have advocates that are actually co located with child protective investigators. And we have advocates located with law enforcement. And we have our justice advocates that help provide assistance and accompaniment to survivors that have open criminal and civil cases. Our admin office is the Family Justice Center. It was open in October 2020. It provides wraparound services for survivors underneath one roof. Um, and it's collaborative, trauma informed. We also provide free childcare so that the survivor doesn't have to bounce around to multiple agencies to get help because all of those agencies actually sit in the Family Justice Center. We have our state attorney's office that are there. We have the sheriff's office. We have Pinellas County schools. We have St. Pete PD. We have Baycare. We have Gulf Coast Legal Services. We have our mental health care provider, which is ClearPath. Um, and we also have a sexual assault room with our partners from Suncoast Sexual Assault Services. There are ways to get involved. You can volunteer, you can donate monetarily if you want to, in-kind donations as well. All right. Are there any questions? Any thoughts? You can unmute yourself or you can drop it in the chat. I saw somebody ask me about the organizations that assist, and it was Protecting Paws is the one that we partner with.
I had a couple of questions.
Yes.
Um, so to get the service in terms of the pet, do they have to be at the at CASA shelter or they can go to the Justice Center
Yeah,
for
they
that?
just have to be a CASA survivor so that however they need services. If they don't need shelter services, they can come to our Family Justice Center and get services through our outreach offices. Yes.
Okay, so they just walk in.
Yeah. Or they can call and make an appointment.
Okay, and then what do you think is the best idea to do? Is to make the appointment or to walk in?
I mean, it really just honestly, it's just Andrew, depending on the survivor, if she wants to come in, and she can talk and kind of triage with an advocate if they have the time to do it and they're not actively in danger.
Right,
I
right.
would say call triage with an advocate so that when they do come in, it's a more meaningful engagement, right? But if they can't, absolutely walk in.
Okay. And so I know that there's 45 days that they can stay at the shelter. And so do they put an action plan for after those 45 days?
From the
And
moment,
then are they allowed to come back and triage through the Justice Center?
yeah. So the moment that a survivor enters our shelter, within 72 hours, they are assigned a case manager. They are assigned a housing advocate, and case management begins on day 3. So that we're working really proactively on what is the plan leaving shelter because shelter is not a permanent solution.
Right.
Yeah. So then once they leave our shelter, then their case management gets transferred over to the Family Justice Center.
Okay.
And then their case managed until however long they need that service.
And are they aware of this? I'm very familiar with the shelter. I do presentations there for workforce development. But I have had a lot of clients that have maxed out their 45 days or they've gotten the extension. And I'm just wondering because this has become, something where they kind of feel left out in the cold. And if I had the right information, then I can explain to them because I think sometimes maybe so much is going on, they're not taking it all in. So I just wanted to what's the correct information? Like, is it good for them after the 45 days for them to just go to the Justice Center? And
Right.
would your
Yeah. If
advice
they
be for me to respond to something like that, which is very common with that
right.
shelter?
So I just want to. So what I hear is were at shelter and were
Mm-hmm.
case managed at shelter, but now have left
After the
and
45
still need
days.
resources and still need
Right.
they still need to that connection because they're still kind of struggling. Yeah, so
Right.
I would
Because
say
it's
if
impossible in 45 days to get your life together.
right. So if a case manager from the Family Justice Center has not reached out to that survivor, they can absolutely, I empower the survivor to reach out to the Family Justice Center
Okay.
and come in and say, I need to continue with my case management and my services here. And they have
Okay.
support group there, which is great because after 45, I would say that there's a window we have to get a survivor to be able to engage in services. But then
Right.
there's also a window that we also have to help them in that survivorship, where you get to fan those flames of survivorship. And it's definitely, within those like 3 months after leaving shelter, they really need to stay plugged in. And so our
Right.
support group that they have every week is great to get that started. They have childcare, they provide dinner.
Right. I didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah. And
One more question. So in the shelter, I know that you can bring your pet, but they have to be up to date on shots. If not, then you suggest reaching out to the other organizations.
what they do is they can reach out to the shelter and say that they have a pet and they want to bring their pet. If they don't have the necessary documentation that they need to bring their pet in with them, they will work with an advocate with the organization that we work with, where their pet will be their will identify a vet that will take the pet in to do the vaccinations, to do the quarantine period, and then
Yeah.
after that, the pet will join the survivor at our shelter. So it's a service of our shelter.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yes.
thank you so much for that information.
You're welcome. Those were good questions, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
We do have another question in the chat from Suzanne Boylan. How do you activate or initiate the CASA Street team on behalf of a client?
So, I think you're asking how do you provide a referral for a client? So, if that's the question, I'm just going to say, is well, so we're empowerment based. And so we do have referral pathways that we can create with our partnering agencies so that they can refer a client over to CASA for services. But this is what has happened many times before. We get the referral, we call the survivor, and then the survivor does not engage with us, or the survivor has returned, or the survivor says to us, which happens a lot, I really didn't want those services. I just said yes. So what we always encourage is that our partners to call right then and there with your client in front of you, our hotline, to allow them to get screened in for services. And they can say, get screened in for services to the outreach offices. They can say, no, I don't need emergency shelter, but I do need to speak with somebody. I'm experiencing domestic violence. And then they can come in and meet with a case manager at our Family Justice Center. Or if they do screen in and they qualify for our shelter services and we have beds available, then they'll screen them in for our shelter. I hope that answered your question. And if it didn't, please drop it in the chat again. Any other questions? Well, listen, you guys did great. I love the questions, and I'm going to give you some time back. Go stretch your legs, go get you some dessert, whatever. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. I'm going to hand it back to Megan.
Thank you, Julie. Um, this was uh, a heavy session with the pets, but I appreciate you sharing the information with us because it's very important. Um, and yeah, nobody else has any questions. Yeah, we appreciate you doing this for the Pinellas CoC. All your trainings are wonderful. And we
Thank
will
you.
have you back August 7th pretty soon to do Be a Better Bystander training. So everyone look forward to that. That'll be sent out shortly on the social medias. And yeah, thank you again, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.